Welcome to my 2024 shop tour. As I go around and talk about each tool, I'm going to give you my favorite tips and tricks to help you become more accurate and efficient. This is going to be unlike any other wood shop you've ever seen because I treat my shop like a creative space. So it's very colorful and extremely unusual. I want to feel creative, I want to feel comfortable, and I want to feel inspired when I come in here. So some of these tools are very expensive and not for your average DIYer. So I am setting up a second shop in a much smaller space using only budget tools. We'll talk about that other shop later. This shop has all the crazy stuff, and this video is sponsored by Squarespace. So let's start right here with this bandsaw. I have two bandsaws. This is the bigger of the two. This is Laguna 14BX with a big 3/4 inch blade on here. This is mostly used for large pieces and resawing. It runs on 220 volt. It has dust collection up top as well as the bottom. Unless I'm resawing very thin pieces, I rarely use the fence. A lot of bandsaws will have a little bit of drift in there, and I can make up for that by moving my board. I do have this mag switch jig right here that allows you to pivot on those bearings, but I rarely use this. I just freehand it right through the blade. One of my favorite features about this bandsaw is the foot brake that shuts it off instantly. This was given to me by my good friend Casey. Thank you, buddy. This is the Proxxon scroll saw. I don't use it too much. If you don't have a scroll saw, you can always use your CNC. My grandfather, he was the master at the scroll saw, and one of the tricks that he taught me was, check this out. When the blade gets dull, you can put in a little riser, clamp that in place, and you can use the fresh part of the blade. This is the bandsaw that I've used most. I've had 6 different bandsaws. I've had a Harbor Freight, I've had a Rikon, a Grizzly, I got that Laguna over there, I got the Wen over in the other shop, and then this little Rikon right here. This is my favorite bandsaw of all time. This is the Rikon 10305. There is a Rikon 10306, and I have been told that people have trouble tracking the blade on the 10306. So if you can get the 10305, this is the best bandsaw I've ever used. I love this thing. I only use one blade in here unless I'm cutting aluminum or acrylics, and that is the 3/16 4 TPI skip tooth blade from Highland Woodworking. My favorite feature about this bandsaw is the 4 3/4 inch cutting capacity. That's pretty big for a little bandsaw, and many times I have used that full capacity and it works just fine. I've made many bandsaw boxes on this bandsaw. Sometimes when you're cutting small pieces at the bandsaw, they can fall through the throat here. So what I like to do is take a piece of plywood, run it through the blade, and then clamp it to the table. And now you have a 0 insert table, and which will also give you cleaner cuts on the bottom. If you need to cut a bunch of dowels to the exact same length, you can glue on a little stopper right in front of the blade. I've been getting into 3D printing a lot lately. This is the Bamboo Lab A1 FDM printer, and then I also have the Elegoo Saturn resin printer. We're not going to go into a lot of detail, but I'm going to show you why they come in handy a little later. This is my Rikon 8-inch helical head joiner. I don't know what model number it is because I tore the sticker off the front. This is one of those nice to have tools. It takes up a lot of space. If I ever needed more space in the shop, this is probably the first tool to go because I'm going to show you some tricks with the table saw and the planer where you might not need a joiner. But it is a nice to have and it speeds up the process. I don't really know many joiner tricks, so if you have any good ones, let us know down in the comments. Over here, blocking the fire exit is my Stepcraft M700. This is going to be a dedicated CNC plasma cutting table that got the plasma cutter underneath. I have carpet in here, so having a plasma cutter in here, not a good idea. So once I am done putting this together, that's gonna go in the shop. Over here in the corner is, oh my goodness, I love this thing. This is my Rayjet R400 laser cutter. This thing can cut and engrave very large pieces and works very fast. This is a crazy luxury to have. Of course, there are cheaper and smaller lasers. We just made a video about one the other day. We made this little side table with only a laser. The goal of that video was to make a piece of fine furniture that didn't look like it was made with a laser. So there's some cool tricks in there. You might want to check that out. Also, that table that we made, that design came from stuff Seth makes. You should check him out. Makes some really cool stuff. If you don't have a scroll saw, you could always use your CNC. This is the Stepcraft M1000. I've got mine decked out with the automatic tool changer. Even if your project only needs one bit, having the automatic tool changer is so nice because I can just tell it to go grab that 1/4 inch bit, go grab that 1/8 inch bit, and I'm not in there like working on the collet, changing out bits. This thing is great. It is the perfect size for me. I don't have one of those crazy, huge, gigantic CNCs because I've never CNC'd full sheets of plywood. Maybe I would CNC full sheets of plywood, but I just don't have the space for that. So this one is perfect for me. I've had this for a couple of years now, and it's just, it just works so good. I use a lot of double-sided tape at the CNC, and there's this great video by Whitworks where he talks about tape for woodworkers, and it has changed my life. I now use this spec tape, pressure sensitive tape here at the CNC and as a hold down over at the bench. It's a great video. You might want to go check that out. I made a fence along this rail, and that allows me to butt up my boards against that. Check this out. This is cool. This is a trick that I learned from my friends at KenCraft. This looks like a brad nailer, but it accepts these plastic nails that go in here. I'm gonna try that again. But these plastic nails go in here, and then I can close that. If you miscalculate something, you don't want to run your bit into a metal nail. That's where these plastic nails come in handy. Another trick for hold down is I'll have my board up against the fences that I installed on here, add a couple pieces of scrap, and then clamp them down. And then usually those are far enough away so it doesn't interfere with the travel of the CNC. If for any reason I miscalculated, this is aluminum. Even these bolts that I'm using are aluminum, and the aluminum is less likely to damage the bit as opposed to steel. To the right of the CNC is my sanding station. Ignore the beautiful window back there. Ignore the beautiful window back there that I have a video on. So I've got a disc sander, a belt sander, a spindle sander, and a drum sander. I am big into sanders because sanding speeds up the process tremendously, which helps me make videos. Some people really enjoy the sanding process. It's very meditative for them. For me, I just want to get through sanding as fast as possible, which is why I have all of these machines. This is a trick that I've never done before, but I learned in an old magazine. On the disc sander, you could have a piece of 120 grit and a piece of like 240 grit on there at the same time. You would just cut out the circle out of the bigger 120, and then you want to put the finer grain circle in the middle there. So you can have two grits at the same time. Cool trick, never done it. I only ever use 120 on my disc sander. This is the Harbor Freight spindle sander, and I had to add some tape to this spindle so the sandpaper would fit on there better. Sometimes it is impossible to get the sandpaper off the spindle. Like this one, it comes off just fine. Every once in a while, it just doesn't come off, and we find ourselves cutting off the sandpaper. Put this in the freezer for 15 minutes. The rubber will shrink, and then your sandpaper roll will pop right off. That's one you can teach your grandchildren. This corner, I have my computer and speakers. I don't use it all that much. I do all the editing in the house, but every once in a while when I don't want to disturb Kelly, I'll bring some music equipment out here, and this is kind of like a play corner. One day this will probably be taken up with actual tools. This is my new jet air filtration system. And what I like about this is I can scoot this over to the sanders or over at the bench or wherever I'm working to filter the air. Along with this, I also got this air filtration meter here. It measures CO2, it measures particles in the air, as well as VOCs. I'm starting to take air quality pretty serious around here. We have pretty decent dust collection, but as you know, dust collection isn't perfect. So trying to filter out the air, just trying to breathe some good air. I want to do this for a long time. Speaking of the jet, over here is my jet lathe. I don't use this nearly enough, Therefore, I don't really have any good lathe tips. And then behind my wood lathe is my little mini lathe for metal stuff. This is my Nova Viking drill press. I made a video about this a couple of years ago, and I still get a lot of questions about if I like it, how is it running, is it recommended? And yes to all of those things. It runs great. I love the digital depth stop on here. When it reaches that depth, it stops and the bit reverses. That is just really, really nice. I can also control the speed right here digitally. I love all of that. It works great. I used to have a keyless chuck on there. It did not spin true, so I went back to the original chuck that came with it, and it's just fine. A couple of accessories I really like with this drill press is this mag switch fence that just locks into place, which is really, really nice. I can just move this wherever I want, and then the magnets lock in place. And then it's even got a stop over here. Careful now. I can move that wherever I want it and lock that down. I also use this magnet over at the table saw as a stop for the cast iron table, because that's really cool. And then speaking of mag switch, this is not sponsored. They just make some amazing products. I do have some affiliate links for this stuff down below. This little guy right here, I've got this vise mounted on a mag switch base here, which then locks into place with magnets. That's freaking cool. That's really nice. So let me show you a couple tricks on the drill press. If you've ever used a countersink bit and you get the chatter where you don't get a nice clean countersink, drill your countersink first, then drill your hole. You will always get a nice clean cut. No chatter, and then you can drill your hole. This is my router table. This is the Shark RS1000 Pro. This thing is freaking nuts. This isn't like any other router table. It's computerized. I can set my height digitally. I can set my fence digitally. I can do repeat cuts. I can get exact precision, and it does a bunch of crazy joinery things that would require a lot of jigs for any other router table. It's like a CNC, but it doesn't require a computer. You can just punch in everything that you want up in here. All the joinery programs are built into it, so you don't design stuff on a computer and then bring it over to the machine like you would a CNC. You just say, hey, I need to make some, what kind of joints does it do, Daniel?
Finger joints, dovetail joints.
Yeah. So you can just say, hey, I want to do some finger joints. Hey, I want to do some dovetail joints. And those applications are already built into there. And then it just sets everything up for you. It's freaking mind-blowing. It's bonkers. It just uses a regular router inside and then mounts into this table. And then I can set the height and the fence. Ugh, my goodness, this thing is freaking crazy.
The computer just controls the bit and the fence.
Yeah, you're right. The computer just controls the bit and the fence. You push things through. It technically is a CNC, but it's not a CNC, if you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? Daniel knows what I'm saying. He's shaking his head yes.
I know what you're saying.
He knows what I'm saying. I have got a dedicated video on this, which goes over all the bonkers things that this thing can do. Hashtag not sponsored. In that video, instead of using a router, I put in a spindle. I have since gone back to just a regular Porter cable router in there because that spindle only accepted 1/4-inch bits, and I like to use both 1/4-inch and 1/2-inch, and that spindle wasn't powerful enough for big, massive joints. So if you're, I got a lot of questions saying, what spindle did I use? How did I mount that spindle in there? I don't recommend it. Just get a regular if you get this machine, just get a regular freaking router and mount it in there. So it's mounted into a Craig table. You can mount it into anything that you want. So the RS1000 Pro is just the router lift area, and then the brains and all the electronics that go in underneath. Let me show you my favorite router trick. One of the things that I like about this is being able to move the router up and down so fast for quick bit changes. I don't have any hard maple on hand. Hard maple always burns. I only have this piece of soft maple, and I tried to get it to burn, but my bit is not dull enough. So I did get a little bit of burning, but my favorite trick on the router is to remove that burning. Do it in 2 passes. Get most of it on the first pass, and then dial in your settings so you're taking off just a fraction for a final pass. Another thing that I recommend is adding variable speed to your router, because on really large bits, you want to slow that down. This will also help with burning. So this switch has variable and full. Moving along down to the miter saw, my buddy Matt Taylor, he's an amazing local artist, painted the wall here. I just want to feel creative and inspired when I walk into the shop. That's why my shop doesn't look like anybody else's. I love the colorfulness. I love the wall paneling. I have carpet in here because I want to feel comfortable. The carpet also helps with the sound. Also got an acoustical ceiling, which helps with the sound too, because these tools can be loud, and anything that I can do to deaden that sound helps. The only other person that I know who has carpet in their shop, Stumpy Nubs. Amazing channel. If you want amazing woodworking tips, 2 channels that you should check out. Stumpy Nubs, phenomenal. Also, Workshop Companion. Those 2 channels, they are putting out tips that I don't see anybody else doing. I don't see in the magazines or in my old books. I don't know where they are getting their information from, but they got some super secret insider information. Just amazing channels for woodworking tips. This is the Festool K-Pex. I have no affiliation with Festool. I picked this saw out because it has the best dust collection out of any miter saw. Every magazine tool shootout ranks this as the best miter saw for dust collection. Plus, Festool just makes some high quality stuff. Festool is also very polarizing. Some people are looking for a reason to hate them. I get it. It's all good. No big deal. So therefore, I removed their branding from the saw. So one time, this motor burned up. Yeah. If you're looking for a reason to hate on Festool, one time this motor burned up. I don't know why. So we sent it in to get it fixed, and I had removed all the branding off of here. When I got it back, they put all their branding back on the saw. So then I had to paint over that. Here in the shop, it's not about tools. It's not about the brand name. It's about doing the work and finding the tools that bring you the most pleasure. Some people enjoy the sanding. Some people enjoy the finishing. Some people love to take their time, and so they'll work with hand tools. Find the tools that work best for you within your budget that you are going to get the most pleasure out of. For me, safety and dust collection, 2 of the most important things. I guess accuracy is right there. Safety, dust collection, and accuracy, the most important things here in the shop. I want to work as efficient as possible. The more things that I can make, the more things that I have. I'm gonna spend some good money for the tools in this shop. If you are looking for budget-friendly stuff, I am setting up a budget-friendly shop. That shop is not ready for a tour yet, but we just did a video where we bought all the Wen tools, and I'm pretty happy with most of those tools, except that one tool. That one tool. Remember what happened to you? My 2 favorite tricks on the miter saw. I learned both of these from Jimmy DiResta. That dude is just a wealth of knowledge.
How come you didn't give his channel a shout out then?
I'm giving his channel a shout out right now.
But when you said 2 channels that you gotta watch, you said
2 channels, those 2 channels you gotta watch for tips. You watch.
Well, you just said Jimmy's got the best tips.
This first one is cutting small pieces and keeping your hands away from the blade. There's no place to put a clamp on here. So what I can do is throw my board in there, just grab any other board and use that as a clamp. A lot of times I find myself cutting boards to fit, so I need to sneak up on that perfect length. If you just need to take off just a little bit of the end, so we'll put our blade down, and you can see there's a little bit of springiness on that blade, so we'll push up against that, we'll lift up. And we can work our way to the perfect fit. I have a 60-tooth crosscut blade in my miter saw because I only do crosscuts at the miter saw. And that crosscut blade is going to leave me a nice clean cut, especially in plywoods. Moving over to the bench, we actually have a project on the bench right now, and that's this record player stand that I'm working on. This is the top half. We haven't made the bottom half yet, but record player is gonna go up here. And then inside here, records, you can be able to flip through the records. And the bottom is sort of like this, but flipped upside down. And then we're gonna make little stands for the speakers. There's a lot of talk about bench height, and some people have different theories on that. My bench is 1 inch lower than my table saw height, so I can use this as an outfeed when I'm running big sheets of plywood. I also have this little rolly cart here, which is the same height as my bench, and then I can also roll this over to the table saw if I need to. All the tool benches all the way around 1 inch lower than my table saw, just so I can use them as supports when working with bigger sheet goods. I have T-tracks installed in my bench, and honestly, I rarely use them. They just fill up with glue and junk. My favorite hold down method is a dog hole and then these hold down clamps, which just smack it right on there. That's super solid. And then to release it, hit the back of it, pops right off. That's my favorite hold down method at the bench. I use that way more than the T-tracks installed. In fact, I forget about the T-tracks half the time. This might be my favorite tip at the bench, is using this pink purple foam insulation stuff to cut with my jigsaw and my track saw at my bench. And instead of cutting into the bench, I cut into the foam. Remember that 3D printer that I mentioned earlier? I've been using it a lot lately to print up these drawer dividers. 2024 is going to be the year of organization for me. So we've got 2 tools left, and I've saved my favorite tips for those last 2 tools. Before I get to that, I kind of want to show you what's going on behind my bench here. This is a sliding wall, and every year I change up the color. I love change. Change just helps me. I feel like I'm more creative when I rearrange things and change things up. So this year we went with the wall paneling, the cherry wall paneling, which Daniel's not a big fan of. He says it, what do you say?
Abusive childhood memory.
He's my brother. He was not abused. If anybody was abused, it was him abusing me.
Oh, yeah, right.
So, but it reminds him of our childhood having the wall paneling. I just like changing it up every once in a while. It just makes me feel better. Basically, we're in a garage and there's a track up top that's just made for sliding closet doors. But I have it running the length of the entire garage. And these are just regular doors that are just hanging on there. I did have to extend the doors a little bit, so they're the full 8 feet, and then this just slides along here. While I am showing you the secret mess that I keep behind these doors, I'd like to tell you about today's sponsor, and that is Squarespace. Squarespace has been a sponsor of this channel for a long time. I think I've done like 6 or 7 of these shop tours, and I think they have sponsored every single one. This first section here is just all finishes and cans of stuff. It is now 2024. You need a website, even if it's just a single page, just as a digital business card, you need a website. Squarespace is the perfect place to do that. It seems like everybody has a podcast these days. Even I have a podcast. You can use Squarespace to host your podcast website. If you've ever tried to set up a podcast without having a podcast platform, there's a lot of things that you got to make talk to each other, and feeds and RSSs, and it's a mess. Forget about the mess. Just set up a Squarespace site and you don't have to worry about it at all. Maybe you have a community of like-minded people and you want to set up a little password protected site. You can do that with Squarespace. Maybe you're a lot like me and you want to sell stuff. You can sell physical and digital items with Squarespace. I might have plans for this record stand. It depends on how well it comes out. But if I do, I'm going to sell those plans here on Squarespace. Here's all my wood storage, small pieces on the shelf here. This is what I call the future project shelf. You can't even see what's up there, but there's potential. I just went through a redesign with my Squarespace site. It couldn't have been easier. It's just copying and pasting and dragging and dropping. I was able to change the colors on my site by just a few clicks. It's just that easy. You don't need to know a thing about the code, cloud, the back end, any of that stuff. And over here, I got some of the bigger pieces, and it's just a mess. This is why I don't show this off on camera too much, because it's just a mess. Visit squarespace.com, and when you're ready to launch, visit squarespace.com/make something for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you, Squarespace, so much for sponsoring this video. We got 2 more tools to talk about. Let's go to the planer. This is my Rikon planer. It planes up to 16 inches wide. I like that width. I can run 2 boards through at the same time. Makes me pretty efficient here in the shop. It's got the helical head, which leaves a buttery smooth top, which we need to rotate our little carbide cutters here soon because they're getting pretty dull. But the helical head is a much quieter planing process, and it just leaves buttery smooth surface, and it is great for figured wood. A couple of my favorite tricks here on the planer. This is a big flat piece of 3/4 inch plywood that I took adhesive back sandpaper and covered the whole thing. I also use this at my table saw, and so the T-track on here is for the table saw and not the planer. This is great for planing boards flat, especially if you don't have a joiner or if your joiner is not wide enough. So I got this big old slab right here. It is rough on the top and the bottom. And as you can see, it's got some wobble. So because of the sandpaper on there, I don't have to glue this down, and this is not going to move. I'm just gonna throw a couple wedges on here until that wobble is completely gone. Now we can run this whole thing through the planer. So once you get one side flat, you can remove the sled, flip it over, and do the other side. And that is how you can get 2 perfectly flat parallel faces without a joiner. Next trick on the planer. If your board is thick enough, you can also joint an edge of the board by running it through the planer like this. But if your board isn't thick enough and you're worried about it falling over, you can add some double-sided tape to a couple pieces of scrap, sandwich that together, make it a little bit more stable. We can joint this edge. If you don't have a clean, straight edge to work with, you can always have these supports sticking up just a little bit. Let's pretend this piece of cherry was a really expensive, beautiful piece of exotic wood, and I didn't want any snipe, and it was too short to run through the planer. You can always glue on some extra boards on the side, and now that snipe is gonna happen on the back end of our scrap boards. I typically don't get a lot of snipe with this particular planer, but if it would have happened, it would have happened right there. So now I can break off these boards, and my expensive piece of cherry is perfectly plain. This is my SawStop 3 horsepower table saw. I'm 6 table saws old now. This is by far my favorite, and it's not because of the flesh sensing technology. The overall build quality of this thing is absolutely amazing. The fence feels phenomenal. There's no sharp corners on everything. Everything just feels nice, and it's super accurate. So this is the 3 horsepower version, which takes 220 volt. You don't have to have the 3 horsepower one. It's more of a nice to have. If you've got a sharp blade in there, you can cut some pretty thick material on the 1.75 horsepower saws. I've had both, so I know. Just the 3 horsepower, just nice to have. You can just push anything that you want through there at any speed, and it'll just chop it right up, and it won't bog down. I've decked mine out with an outfeed table, and then I have this sliding crosscut table on the side here. I can add this fence, lock that down, and I can cut very large pieces of sheet goods with this thing. I prefer this over the crosscut sled because I can come back this far. I can rip some pretty large sheets. I've got a video on making this. SawStop does make a sliding crosscut table attachment that you can get for your saw. I like this because it's a lot smaller, and the fence is removable, and you can put it back on and it pops back on at a perfect 90 degrees. This has been a game changer. I got a video on that. Cutting tapers at the table saw requires a homemade jig. I even have this micro jig one. Look how complex that thing is. I haven't used this in years. You can tell by how much dust is on that thing. Much simpler way. That same sled that we used over at the planer, I use it here at the table saw to ride up against my fence. So it's got that grippy sandpaper on top. I just draw my line here on the board, and I'll have that hang off the edge. I got the T-tracks in there so I could clamp this down if I want. This board is small enough, that sandpaper is grippy enough, I can just hold this in place. Cut perfectly on that line, we're good to go. This sled is also great for joining one edge. Remember that sled that we planed down a little bit ago? Let's run it through here. And now I can use that edge that we just cut, run that up against my fence, and cut the other side perfectly parallel. And just like with the router, sometimes with hard maple, you get some burnt edges. I don't have any hard maple here. There is a little bit of burnt edge on this cherry. Hard maple will always burn, but we could always rough cut the first one and then do just a tiny little sliver of a cut for no burning. To cut really thin strips at the table saw, it can be a little dangerous to have your fence that close to the blade, also very difficult to cut. So this is a thin rip jig here, which rides in the miter slot. I can butt this up against that. You wanna make sure it is behind the blade and not pushing on the blade. I can just bring my fence over so it kisses that, lock that down, make another cut. If you have a Meg Switch magnet, you can also use that. Lock that down into place. Then I can bring my fence over till it kisses that and push that through. Some of my favorite house-made jigs for the table saw is this saddle that goes over the fence here. And then I can use this to make splines for picture frames. So that locks into there. And then I can push this through the table saw. That record player stand that we're working on, we had to do some really extreme angles on there. My blade doesn't go to those extreme angles. So we took this guy, set it over top of the fence, clamped our boards to that, and then ran those through. There are just endless amount of jigs you can make for the table saw. We could do a whole series of table saw jigs. Daniel, we should do a whole series on table saw jigs. I know some of these tools are crazy expensive. And like I mentioned earlier, we are setting up a second budget-friendly shop. And I got 2 videos where we're buying tools for that shop. One is the cheapest tools that we found on Amazon, and another is we bought every single Wen woodworking tool. Check it.